Okay. All right. I think we are live. Anybody who's tuning in, it might just be me and Sebastien talking all night, but that is fine. So hello, everyone, and welcome to another Broken Binding interview. My guest this evening is Sebastien de Castell. How are you doing, Sebastien?
I'm doing great, Stephen. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. We should also mention that, of course, Sebastien will be coming to the UK very, very soon for an in-person event in Birmingham. So if you are around in Birmingham in about 4 weeks on Monday, the 9th of June, you can come and see him in person, where I will also be interviewing him then as well. Tickets are available via the Broken Binding website, so check that out. We'll talk a bit about Sebastien's career, some of his books, and then we'll come on to the new one, Malevolent 7, Malevolent 8, and possibly Malevolent 9. Who can say?
Well, I will say at the end, that's why I have to watch the whole interview. Then
see, we're not going to spoil it. There's no spoiler. Yeah, okay. So, I know you debuted a year before me in 2014 with The Traitor's Blade, which was your first book. But what I'm curious about is, it took you a number of years to write that first book. How is it writing the second book? Because suddenly you've gone from all the time in the world and your own input to then working with an editor to then suddenly write. You've done that. Now do exactly the same thing, but better, and in about a year's time. So how was it writing the second book?
You know, the second book was tough for sure. I had a few things in my favor. The first was, and hi, Crazy Cat. Thank you for being here. The first was that I signed my deal in 2012, the manuscript for Traitor's Blade, which the original, not everyone knows this, the original manuscript for Traitor's Blade was written in 3 days. With no outline, with nothing. There's a thing called the 3-day novel writing contest that's happened every year for, I don't know, the last 45 years. And on the last day of registration, I just saw a mention of it, and I went, maybe I'll try that. I don't have much to do this weekend. I had one music gig. I had to play a wedding. I was like, yeah, I can do it. And then I just basically poured all these different ideas I'd had while going running, because I tell myself stories when I go running, because I'm a terrible runner and I need to distract myself. So I'll like have a song that'll play, and I'll go, and the song will make me think of an idea for a scene, and I'll just play the song on repeat over and over again while I kind of basically compose the scene. And I hadn't realized I had kind of done that with all of these swashbuckling magistrates, dealing with intrigue and conspiracies story in my head. And so I kind of pulled that out, and then that was like a long time ago. And then a few years later, I went, okay, well, maybe I'm going to give a serious try at this. So the manuscript came, 2.5, 3 times the length. So the first version, the one I wrote in 3 days, just to not freak anyone out, wasn't like 120,000 words, it was 44,000 words, which is still a lot to write in 3 days.
Yeah.
Especially since I had to spend time rehearsing to sing The Lady in Red for a wedding, because I'd never sung that song before. And that's still kind of a trauma that sticks with me to this day.
That's fair.
But I slept great. I slept 8 hours a night while I was writing that book. And at the end, I had this crazy manuscript. And so I expanded it. And then I ended up getting a wonderful agent. I was really lucky, Heather Adams, who's still a good friend of mine. Like when I'm in the UK, we're going to go walking in the Cotswolds and hopefully connect with Heather and her husband Mike. And then I got this 3-book deal, but that was that was in 2012. And because at the time, publishing in the UK certainly was a little less just in time, like, okay, we signed the book and now we've got to have the cover 4 days later, and now we've got to get it on the shelves within like 3 or 4 months. So it's much more rapid now in that sense. Then it was still, okay, now we've got book 1, we've got it all copy edited, it's ready to go. It's not going to be published for, a minimum of 18 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Or, so I guess, it was December 2012, and then it came out April 2014. So there was some run up. So immediately I was writing book 2. And so book 2 was ready, in fact, before book 1 was out. But you're 100% right. The problem with book 2, and I say this to everybody who's writing, who's sort of making a break, is your second book has to be better than your first book, just for people to say it's almost as good.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the first time you encounter Sherlock Holmes in your life, or the Three Musketeers, or anyone, you know, any great character, you're like, this is the most amazing thing ever. This is speaking to me on a level that I haven't found anything that speaks to me this way. And there's so much of that juice is that original discovery, right? I mean, it's almost like a relationship. The reader, you know, in the first book is basically going out on their first dates with the characters, and they have all the butterflies, and they're like, this is the greatest romance of all time between a reader and a book. And then book 2 comes around, and they're like, oh God, I'm sick of that person. So you have to make it better. And that was a very difficult challenge. And also because it ended up being a longer book, and my amazing editor, who's still my friend and still edits a lot of my books, Jo Fletcher, she, you know, she always adheres to the philosophy that the book has to be the length the book wants to be, and the book has to take the time the book needs to take in order to be the book it will become. And so, whereas Traitor's Blade was something like 117,000 words, Night's Shadow, the sequel, was 186 or 187,000 words. And so I thought that was fine. I was like, well, you know, it's even more torture scenes for the reader to appreciate.
Yeah, sure.
But the terrible thing that happened is that my German publishers then said, because everything that gets translated into German becomes 30% longer. They said, well, we need to split the book in 2. And so I had to kind of alter the middle so that it could be 2 separate books, even though in every other place it was published as one book. But Germany also has price fixing on books. So, and every German reader on the planet, for the most part, also reads English and is tuned into the internet. And so German readers were completely aware that they were being forced to pay twice for one book.
Ouch.
And this has happened to other people. I think it's happened to Patrick Rothfuss and people like that. And they don't appreciate that at all. And so that actually really killed the second book in Germany. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer of saying, yeah, it's definitely tougher, but as long as you remember that, you know, as with any book, as long as you remember to stay true to the characters, right? And just always be asking that question, like, what would they actually do next? Not what does the plot need them to do next? What would they actually do next? You can always construct the circumstances to force them somewhere eventually, but you have to kind of honor the person that you've created in the form of your main characters. So that's always the challenge. It's less a challenge with Malevolent Eight, and we'll get that later in the reasons why, but certainly for the Greatcoats, book 3 of the Greatcoats was incredibly difficult to write.
Really? How come?
I think the third book is the hardest. And I think before we went live, you and I were talking about friends of ours that, you know, are struggling with the third book. And I think I think there's a reason for that. And it's that sense of you've already built up so much, and you've already kind of, every great idea you had for a really fun scene, for example, with those characters in that world you've already done. So now you either invent new ones, which can feel incredibly difficult, or you're kind of recycling things and repeating yourself. I found when I was writing the Spellslinger series, which is 6 books, that it was incredibly difficult in some ways not to repeat myself in certain ways. There's times where that's okay because you know, that's the nature of it. You know, if you're writing a cop series, you know, the cops are going to chase somebody at some point.
Yeah.
You can't go, nope, Law and Order season 1, episode 1, it had a cops chasing a criminal, so we can never do that again.
That's out.
But you have to find new ways to do it. And I certainly found that with the Greatcoats, was that I constantly, you know, I didn't ever want Falkio to repeat the same sword fight, for example. I wanted each one to be a reflection of a different part of his character and of the nature of those kind of violent interactions. And so Saint's Blood, for example, I spent a lot of time, you know, writing a scene that moved the plot forward, that it might be a fight scene or an action scene of some kind, and then going, it's not, that scene on its own isn't telling us anything new. It's just functional, right? And I spent a couple of years doing sword choreography for theater plays. And the thing that taught me that was so helpful when I became a novelist is, in most, for example, a lot of people know this, in most Shakespeare plays, the fight scene is literally just one line: they fight.
Right.
Dialogue, 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 they fight, dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. And so when you're doing the choreography for a fight scene, a duel, a war scene, whatever it is, you have to imbue. You don't have the words. They don't let when you're choreographing, Richard III, they don't let you add words to the fight scene just because you want some pacing and drama. So you have to do it all with action, but the action has to reveal character, and it has to advance the story, and it has to, in some ways, illustrate themes of what's been said before and what will be said later. And so there was a lot of that for me with Saint's Blood. And then Tyrant's Throne, which is the fourth book in the series, the hardest thing I'd ever done in my entire life, other than Our Lady Blades, which is the book I'm working on now.
I've read the Greatcoats series, and I love them. But what I like in particular is that it's not a traditional 4-book series or even a trilogy where, it's part 1, part 2 of a story. They're all connected and the characters obviously carry on, but there is a conclusion at the end of the first book, and they've evolved and changed. So that in the second book, the after effects carry on. I don't want to spoil it, but there's things and the characters have absolutely changed. By the time you get to the fourth one, they're so different in some ways. They've gone through all these different kind of evolutions or devolutions in some ways, but you still got to tie everything up in a satisfactory way on that fourth book. I found writing the last book of every series I've done has been the most challenging. So is that why you were trying to kind of close enough things off but leave some threads for later?
Yeah, you have to, again, the first challenge is you don't want to just repeat yourself.
Yeah.
Second challenge is the sense of climax. Like what is the climax of the series as opposed to the climax of the book? And thank you for your comment about each book being kind of complete. That's always incredibly important to me. I want every book to feel complete in itself. When I gave my agent the manuscript for Night Shadow, the second Greatcoats book, when she read it, she said, "I love this. It's amazing, but the end feels like the reader could just stop reading it at the end of the series." And I said, "Yep, that's the point." Because first of all, as a reader myself, I mean, there's nothing less satisfying than you get to the end of a book that you're loving, and then you realize you're not going to get a sense of completion.
Yeah.
You don't get that next book, which might take who knows how long before it's released. Then you're stuck, which then causes people to do the thing that destroys the careers of comic book artists and writers everywhere, which is they go, "I'll wait till the whole series is out."
Yeah, I'll wait for the trade. I'll wait for the series to finish.
Yeah. Which unfortunately, bookstores don't think that way. Bookstores go, "They didn't sell a lot of book 1. Let's not bother buying book 2." And so, you might miss out on things that you love. I continuously find that now, where I'll pick up a fantasy novel that just at random, and I'll realize it's just an amazing series, for example, that, I didn't discover because the initial run wasn't successful enough.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with the climax of a series, which was the case with Tyrant's Throne, you really have to figure out not just what's the completion for those characters, but what was the series really saying in the end. And I was a bit lucky in that the Greatcoats series, even though it's swashbuckling fantasy, it's kind of, it was originally pitched as sort of the Three Musketeers meets Game of Thrones. And that's always what I wanted to write, was those very idealistic and funny swashbuckling characters, but in a world where it's much darker, where those things don't always work out that well. But I was always writing about idealism. Like that's what was kind of driving me. So the first book is about idealism versus corruption, which is a very easy, thing to think about, like idealism versus cynicism. So Trader's Blade, but when that book opens, the Greatcoats are kind of reviled for being these, for being weak, cowards, failures, because the king died, and everyone sort of, and now people think knights are wonderful, even though the knights are brutes. They don't like them, and so that cynicism which pervades our society so often, and especially for me, I felt that so poignantly in the mid 2000s, that we'd reached this point where where saying someone was an idealist was almost like a way of denigrating them. It kind of meant that nothing they did really had consequence.
Or they were seen as naive in some ways, as opposed to wanting something better is bad. Like, why is that a bad thing?
Yeah, it became sort of synonymous with naivete, with not facing the real nature of the world. And so the second book, Night Shadow, was about idealism pitted against pragmatism, because one of the other things that's changed in my lifetime that still shocks the hell out of me is everyone has become a Machiavellian. Like, everyone thinks, whatever you do, the means justify the ends. Or the ends justify the means. I'm sorry. The ends justify the means. Everybody thinks as long as the right guy gets in, then it doesn't really matter how that happened. As long as the right law gets passed, then it doesn't really matter, if other laws were broken along the way. And so that was about that. And the third book was about idealism versus faith. That was Saint's Blood. And what do you hold to if you're a religious person? I meet religious people who have to face this sometimes, where their faith might say one thing, their ideals might say another, and they have to try to reconcile that. And the fourth was, and so that made it easy, because that meant Tyrant's Throne. I wanted to be the hardest contrast for someone like Falkio to face, which is the ideal of the law versus the ideal of justice. Again, we live in a world where everybody says justice is more important than the law, which makes perfect sense. But one of the differences is that justice is subjective, right? Justice for me is, your father stole something from me, and so I take it from you. I take it back from you. Yeah. But then justice for you is, well, you didn't steal anything, and now someone's come and stolen from you, which is how you get all these wonderful vendettas. And so, whereas the law, which is this incredibly flawed and imperfect by its nature thing, it tries to be objective. It only functions when it is objective, when it's not relevant, the nature of the person in whatever role they're playing inside of the a legal mechanic. Or how they're supposed to be treated the same under the law. And so for Tyrant's Throne, the big, when Saint's Blood came out and everyone said, well, God, the big villain in Saint's Blood ends up being like a god. What's Falkio going to face that's more terrifying than a god?
Than that, yeah.
Yeah. And I had the answer right away. I was like, he's going to face the other Greatcoats. It's going to be, because there comes a point where, these traveling magistrates, some of them say the country is so corrupt it would be better if it was ruled by judges, and they might be right, but Falkio has to sort of reconcile again internally which ideal do you support. So again, kind of a long-winded way of answering the real.
No, that's fine. His faith isn't faith unless it's tested, and his belief in the law and justice has to be tested, and we see it through different lenses in each book. So I looked this up, and I think all of your books have been written first person at this point. I think apart from
one of them was not, which is Crucible of Chaos, which I think you have a copy.
I have a copy of Crucible of Chaos to read. I've read all the Greatcoats. I have Crucible of Chaos. I have Play of Shadows now to read. So the Broken Binding ones over there.
Yeah.
Okay, but all of them up to that point. So so by keeping Falkio as the consistent point of view, was it easier then to go through the different kind of aspects that you were exploring in the themes by keeping it as from one lens rather than jumping between different people who would have different perspective on each aspect that you're exploring?
Well, in part, I mean, every writer sort of faces this, which is that there are certain POVs and certain tenses that we just tend to be better at. So, for example, for a long time, almost nothing was written in present tense. Now it's much, much more common. And it came out of, I think a lot of YA started being written in present tense, which reflects sort of, which has a virtue, right? It reflects an immediacy. It's not someone telling you the story of what happened to them when they're 16. It's them at 16. But not everybody writes present tense very well. And similarly, first person and third person, first person, I walked into the room, I picked up the gun, I, drank a beer, versus, Joseph, walked into the room, saw the gun, picked it up, and drank a beer. I tend to write, I think, more fluidly in first person. And in fact, Play of Shadows was the first fantasy novel where I originally intentionally wrote it in third person. So I wrote I think 7 or 8 drafts of that book, which is not usually my normal process, and the opposite of the Malevolent 7 books. But I wrote all these drafts of it and really like had everything done and nailed, and I was like, this is perfect, all written in third person. And then I had this just weird random thought, because we were going to go to proofreading and then to typesetting, and I thought, I'm just going to try rewriting the first chapter, the first 3,000 words, in first person. Just.
No.
So I did that, and I sent it to Joe Fletcher, and I said, "This is terrible. Just please tell me the third person is better or as good." And she said, "Crap."
Oh, shit.
So I had to go and rewrite the entire book into first person.
Oh, no.
Blessedly, when I wrote Crucible of Chaos, and because Crucible of Chaos is such an odd book, because it's Estevar Barros, who's this very strange greatcoat. He's kind of like a swashbuckling Hercule Poirot. He's the one that investigates kind of anything supernatural, which there's not tons of interesting stuff in the Greatcoats. And I had done 3 short stories with him, and they were all written third person. And so I wrote this novel with him, and I wrote it in third person. And partly because it was a little bit informed, Estevar as a character, who's called the King's Crucible, he has certain kind of almost Agatha Christie-esque qualities. He's kind of the bombastic sort of detective who walks in and is immediately sort of very brilliant, but he's also got this kind of arrogance about him. And I also like him because he's very heavy set. He's a very heavy person, but he's also he's also determined to always prove that doesn't affect his skill as a swordsman. So he gets himself into trouble for that. And so I had written that book in third person, and then I was going, I wonder if this would be stronger in first, because I hadn't learned my lesson before. And so I rewrote the first chapter in first person and sent it to Joe Fletcher. And blessedly, this time she said, no, it's way better in third person.
Okay.
So
some relief.
Yeah. So we all have we all have those sort of voices that are more or less natural to us. And I would say the hardest thing about writing first person a lot, which of course I do. So the 4 Greatcoats novels are all first person. The 6 Spellslinger novels are first person. The 3 Argosy novels are first person. And the Malevolent books are first person. The challenge is, making sure those voices are not completely different necessarily, but distinct, that they reflect a different person, because it's very easy. I think first person tends to reveal your writing tics more than third person does.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So my sense of humor is sort of my sense of humor, and that shows up with Falkio more than anyone. But it will also tend to slip into Kellen in the Spellslinger books, or Cade in the Malevolent books. And so I always have to make sure that anything that has to do with my style as a writer, still always being kind of manipulated and tamed and channeled through what makes those characters individuals. Yeah,
that's fair enough. We had a question from Caprese Cat saying she's curious, will Damalas appear again in Our Lady of Blades, and will we see Falkio again? I know you're writing, or you're working on Our Lady of Blades now for next year.
Our Lady of Blades is the book I've spent the longest on in my entire career. It's the book that will probably kill me.
Let's hope not.
To answer Caprese Cat's question, so Damalas doesn't appear in Our Lady of Blades. There's a very specific reason for that I'll get into. He will appear again. He will appear again in the Court of Shadows series. And Falkio will appear again, though I'm not allowed to say where and how yet. So the Court of Shadow series is a little different in how it's structured than a lot of sort of conventional epic fantasy series, which is that each book is told from the perspective of its own main character, who is in a different part of Tristia, the country in which it's set, who is both going through their own discovery about themselves and who they're going to be and all the trials and tribulations of that, but also discovering a tiny sliver of the conspiracy that is starting to unfold inside of Tristia. So one of the things that wasn't resonating for me very strongly with fantasy novels for a while was how often the threat that's driving everything in an epic fantasy is entirely perceptible. And it's all like one person, it's one thing. Like you could, if it's not Sauron, and the ring, it's it could be much more convoluted and it's hidden, but eventually it's all like, Vladimir Putin is trying to destroy the world, right?
Yeah.
And we, not to get political, but we live in a world where it kind of feels like Vladimir Putin is sort of trying to destroy the world. And the reason why he's good at it is because he's not a moron who just makes obvious what his intentions are, or how he's going to accomplish what he's going to accomplish, or what the goal is. And so with Court of Shadows, I kind of wanted to have a threat that you can't figure out who it is directly. You can't just investigate and go, oh, now I found the threat. That it's actually all these different threats, and it's only when you kind of bring everyone together who's found all the pieces of it that you can go, okay, now I see what's really going on. So therefore, that's why each of the Court of Shadows books, and Crucible is the quote prelude to Court of Shadows. Estevar encounters a small part of that broad threat. And so Play of Shadows is Damelas's book. He's a kind of a bard daddy. He's what's called a Varistor, although not intentionally. And we discover what that means. It's a very strange kind of theater magic that I really wanted to have and explore in that book. And so he sees a piece as well. And Lady Consequence, who's the protagonist of Our Lady of Blades, also finds a piece of it in her book. And so, but eventually they will all meet up. It will be like the Avengers when the Avengers was good.
Yeah, before it went too far. Yeah. So they wrote what's it, 144 Greatcoats, is that right?
That's right. Yep.
You didn't write a name for each one 144, did you? Please tell me.
No. I'm never that guy. It's funny. Anytime I think Adrian Tchaikovsky and I have been on panels a couple of times together, and I love it because he and I are the polar opposites of this approach. So I've heard him describe it, and where he'll build the entire world. Yeah. The history, the cultures, the biology, the cryptobiology, everything that goes into it. And then he'll go, right, now where shall now let me find the stories here. Whereas I start with a character in a dark cave. I give them a flashlight, and the only world that exists is whatever's in the beam of that flashlight, or torch, sorry, for your British guests. That's how I kind of build it, because I build it so much out of the character. So Traitor's Blade is exactly that way. Like Falkio is this guy who all he ever wanted to be was a greatcoat, because he thought these are the greatest heroes imaginable. These traveling, sword-wielding magistrates who brought justice to the small parts of a country that often didn't see it, and would fight duels to enforce their verdicts against the powerful who might not want them to rule a certain way. He thought these are the greatest heroes. And so I built that world to be a place where everything that would make him happy is kind of taken away. So he's living in a society where people think knights are wonderful because knights are honorable, and honor just means doing exactly what your lord tells you to do. Where people think the king that Falkio idealized was corrupt and weak. Where he is, this guy whose two best friends, one is the greatest swordsman who's ever lived. So Falkio is not as good as Kest as a swordsman, and Brasti is more handsome and everyone likes him. And so because I wanted him to, that's how I sort of build these things out. I built the religion of Tristia with the notion of saints. I built out in part because I wanted so saints are real in this world. They're actual beings that embody a particular virtue to the point where it kind of gives them supernatural abilities. And I wanted Falkio to have to live in a world where even the saints are kind of corrupt. So that's how I tend to build these things out. And so it's a very different process. So 144 Greatcoats was, I knew I couldn't just have it be that there were only 3 and nobody knew what they were. And so I had the idea, I like the word cantor a lot. The cantor is like the leader of and so I like the idea that you would have 12 cantors, and each one had what was sort of termed a choir of magistrates who were responsible for judicial circuits in a certain part of the country. And so Falkio was the first cantor. He was the first leader of 12 Greatcoats, who don't travel together usually, but he would sort of order that. And there's in all my books, you're going to find certain numbers will come up all the time. So 3, 7, and 12. And sometimes 17 now. If I need something more than 12, it'll be 17, because 17 is a prime number. But I just find, for me, I like those. There's a geometry that goes with with different numbers. Some people really love like 4s, because you get the perfect split.
Yeah, the kind of groups.
But I always tend towards those kind of groupings, and so that's how we end up with 144. Because it made sense to me. Also, that there's only so many trained magistrates you would have in a country of that size at a given time. So yeah,
I guess it also now gives you kind of an almost unlimited number of, if you ever want to come back and do another story in that world with a slightly different character, you can say this one's the king's leg, and then you get to write about the king's leg and his story, and then it could be a short story, it could be a novel, it could be a novella, but you can kind of keep dipping into the world, I guess, with different points of view.
Well, absolutely, which in fact I did. So I started a while back writing short stories that I would just sell on my website. And I was shocked by how many people were buying them. I was like, this is amazing. It's because it's so much fun for me, because typically with a novel, there's so many people involved in it, and people making covers and doing all these sort of decisions along the way. With the short stories, I could write one, get it really well copy edited and proofread and typeset it myself and design the cover myself, and set a low price. I sell them, I think, for 99 cents for a short story as ebook, and $1.99 I think as an audiobook. And I always get them narrated by professional narrators. Joe Jameson, who narrates most of my books, narrates most of the Greatcoats books, short stories. Kristen Atherton, who is fabulous, she narrates the Argosy, the Farius Parfax books. I would get her to do some of them, where it was a female main character. And then I put those together as a collection called Tales of the Greatcoats, which, again, I really didn't think anybody bought collections, but that thing has just kept selling at a rate that I found shocking and tremendously rewarding. So I have to put out a second collection soon. But one of the things I love about it is, the best part of doing that is that when you write books in first person, by necessity, you're only letting one person really have the microphone, so to speak. And what I want, one of the first stories I wrote was called Grave of Thorns, and it's about a Greatcoat called the King's Thorn, Muriel de Vierre, and she appears in Tyrant's Throne as one of the kind of rebel Greatcoats, the ones that have decided that it's better that they take over the country and get rid of all the dukes and stuff. And Falkio dismisses her in that book. Like, he's so angry by the point where things are resolved that he literally tells them all, like, makes them take off their coats and then burns the coats. That's how. And so as I was writing that, I was thinking, like, I totally, of course, understood Falkio's perspective, because that would have been probably my perspective in that situation. But I could just get a glimpse of Muriel de Vierre standing there and thinking about what that would be like for her. And of course, I can't explore that inside of a Falkio book. And so I got to write her short story of what happens to her after that. And that was just tremendously fun. So yeah, it's nice to have 144 Greatcoats, because there's other Greatcoats that you get to, spend time with. Yeah,
if you get an itch for a certain type of story, I guess you can always pull on that. So I could talk all day about Greatcoats, but we'll come on to the current series. So, is it true you wrote Malevolent 7 in a month?
I did.
How and why are my questions.
So I am going to reveal the secret technique here for people who want to write books that they don't intend to sell, that end up selling better than the books they spend 3 or 4 years on. So it was 2020. It was February in 2020. It was right when lockdown was starting. And COVID had sort of was starting to be recognized, and I had just come off of a 6-book YA series, and for people who kind of follow fandom and the culture of YA fantasy over the past few years, I think it's changing a little bit now, but it was getting more and more kind of policed as a genre. Right. So there's more and more people saying, you can't do this. You can't say this. Oh, we're so sick of this trope. We're so sick of that trope. And as I always have to explain to people, you could probably go through my books and there's a site called tvtropes.com, I think, which is where everybody gets this stuff from. And you could probably just go, all right, here's the list of the tropes that it's using. And I'm sure that that's correct. And I think that's fun for readers. I'm glad that that's a concept is out there. As a writer in my life, I've never thought, right, now I'm going to pick out these great tropes and put them in a box and make a story from that. It's just not how I think. And so hearing people talking about this trope and that trope and, what's problematic and not problematic. And I had the same copy editor for 6 books. Mm-hmm. So the Spellslinger was 6 books across 3 years. So I was delivering 2 books a year in that series. And I absolutely love my copy editor, and I love the proofreaders. But I was finding that because each book was 6 months apart, I would submit a manuscript, and words that were fine in book 2 were no longer fine in book 4.
Oh wow!
And it's not anybody's fault. Language is supposed to evolve. It's not generally supposed to kind of flip back and forth every 3 weeks the way it's sort of doing right now. Sometimes where people go, oh no, this term is really that you can't use that term, and then somebody quote reclaims the term, and then somebody else says actually that term belonged to someone before that, and it just started getting very strange. So I was literally having words that were okay in one book that were suddenly not okay in another. To the credit of my copy editor publishers, they never said you have to take this word out. They said this is what is starting to become a problem. Right. And I remember in one book, for example, Farius Parfax, who is kind of Kellen's mentor in the Spellslinger books, and kind of my favorite character because she's built out of people I knew when I was a teenager myself, who helped kind of turn me into, as close to not being a loser as was possible for me to become. And she has a way of talking. And so she'll sometimes say things to Kellen, like, when he's like complaining about the world or his responsibilities, and she'll say like, the world is constantly in trouble. And there's always 5,000 reasons like to break things down. And the only thing that stands up against that, or that stops that, are men and women, or women and men, who are willing to stand up and do X, Y, and Z. Right. And I got a note back that was like, could we change that to people? Because of course, not everybody is gender binary, which I accept, which makes sense. But we haven't developed a very good language around those notions. Like when you say man or woman, you don't just mean like adult, male necessarily. Like in a book, it has these other meanings we attach to it. It means adulthood, right? Yeah. And I couldn't find a way to say, what stands against it are adults who, stand up for other people or something. So I was just finding that very difficult to kind of process, and I'd just come off of it. But also there was so much conversation around, what should be written about and what shouldn't be written about, and who should write and who shouldn't write. There is no definition on the planet that anyone has ever proposed of who shouldn't write a book that doesn't include me. And I totally understand that. And if it happens, I accept it. If that's where we all go. But it really can get into your head as a writer. You can start to get to that point where you're just thinking about not getting it, not offending somebody, for example, as opposed to not hurting somebody, which is what you should be thinking about. So there we are. It's February 2020. I've just finished all this. There's all this conversation. Even the good things people write. People write me letters all the time, and they're like, "Oh my God, I love Rikus, the squirrel cat, so much. If you ever kill him, I will hunt you down.
It's lovely, but worrying. Yeah.
And I get a ton of that. If you ever this, if this, I love this. Can't we have more of this? I used to get letters from people. Can't Falkio please marry this person? Or, can't you bring back his dead wife or something? And most writers, I think, get pretty good at recognizing that that's someone expressing themselves, and it's wonderful that your story has helped them express themselves and to sort of trim it out. But I was having trouble with that. So I basically decided on February 1st of 2020, I'm going to sit down. I'm just going to write what I think of as a palate cleanser novel. I'm going to write a book just for myself, not for anybody else. I'm going to make it as offensive as I feel like. I'm going to have tons of magic systems, and I'm not explaining anything. I'm not doing any kind of levels of magic like the Brandon Sanderson stuff that he does so amazingly well and so many people love. I'm like, screw that. There'll be none of that. These characters are going to be mostly awful, and the best looking guy in the group is going to be a rat mage. And I just wrote this book every morning. I'd get up and I just write this book that was almost like, it was almost born of a kind of angry irreverence. I was like, screw everybody. Nobody has to read this. And then I finished the manuscript, and my agent, Heather, said, had asked me what I'd been working on. I sort of described it. And but I said it's not really for publication. She said, "Oh, I'd love to read it." I said, "You can read it, but it's stupid." Like I wasn't even sure if I would self-publish it under my own name.
Right.
That's how concerned I was. And Heather said, "Oh, this is great. I want to sell it." And I said, "Forget it. There's no way." And then Heather was retiring, and my new agent John Wood said, "Oh, I've heard about this manuscript, Malevolent 7. Could I read it?" And I said, "Sure, if you want, but it's I don't think it's right." And he read it. He said, "I love this. I want to sell this." And I was like, "Nobody is going to want to buy this thing. It's Completely insane and offensive, and it's like got more swear words per chapter than anything else I've read on the shelves." And it was the fastest sale I've ever made of a book.
Wow.
It was just, and then but it also taught me something. So here's the happy ending of that story about old white men being worried about cancel culture, is that it turns out that actually most people are not looking to cancel anybody. Most people just don't want people that they care about being hurt. And if what you're writing isn't actually mean-spirited and isn't actually targeting people, and if it's you'll still make mistakes. People can be hurt by mistakes as much as by intent, but that actually, for the most part, I think there's a lot of people that were really wanting something that was kind of irreverent, that was, not afraid to go where it goes and have characters that are it's a group, they're kind of anti-heroes. And so I was absolutely surprised that ended up being this tremendously popular book, which, for me. And so then my publishers came back and they said, "We'd like a sequel." They published it as a standalone, which made perfect sense. And so my agent tells me this, and I say, "Sure." And then he goes, "Okay, well, I just need you to write a pitch. So, outline, sample chapters, synopsis, marketing copy." And I said, "Why the hell do I have to write a pitch for a sequel when the only reason the publishers want a sequel is that the first was financially successful?"
Yeah.
And so, and it's a sequel. It's going to be like that, but the next, book, and he said, "Yeah, it's just kind of the way it is. But take as long as you want." I went, "Forget it." I got off the phone with him and I was like, I'm going to spend an hour on this and nothing more.
Right.
And so I start writing this pitch that is the most offensive pitch ever. That literally opens up by saying, like, thanks to the success of Malevolent 7 and convincing lots of nice people to want to be homicidal war mages, there's an appetite for a sequel, but I think readers deserve better than just a conventional sequel. They deserve more than just so-called anti-heroes who are like, "Oh, woe is me, I'm so irredeemable." No, what they deserve are absolute, like, lunatic homicidal maniacs who just blow everything up. And I was like, let's start by murdering some angels. And so I just wrote this treatment of a scene, kind of the way you would for a Hollywood screenplay. that's just like completely awful, and it's just these angels being tortured, and then the Malevolent Seven showing up, and they murder they kill all the demoniacs who are doing this, because the mortal plane is about to turn into this sort of the battlefield for this war that the Aurorals and the Infernals have wanted to have for millennia, sorry. And so they kill off all the demoniacs, and then the angelics. The angelic warriors are like, oh, this is proof of like the righteousness of the Lord Celestine, and that we are going to be the lords of this world. So then they murder all the angelics, and then one of the poor townsfolk who've had to watch this sort of go like, we thought you were supposed to be the heroes. Well, could you? Mm-hmm. And Cade just goes, well, we might be the heroes, but we're never going to be the good guys. And I was like, there's your pitch, stupid. And I literally said, detailed outline, I think. And I wrote, who the fuck would think that the guy who just wrote that scene was going to give you a detailed outline? Seriously. And I go, but whatever, it's going to be like a great supernatural war, cataclysmic war on the mortal plane. But Cade's approach to pacifism is just kill as many people as he has to prevent the war. Mm-hmm. And then my last line on the pitch was literally the Malevolent Eight, let's get canceled, bitches. And there was one part of it where I realized as I was writing the scene where the Malevolent Seven are killing off all of these demoniacs and angelics, that I realized, oh crap, there's only 6 of them now, but I kind of need 7. So I literally just went, okay. And the 7th is this 7-foot tall creature that almost looks like a rabbit with slightly shorter ears and a long straight tail that he wraps around the necks of his opponents before pummeling them to death and then drinking their blood from the wounds. And I wrote, yeah, he's a fucking vampire kangaroo. And so I sent this kind of as a joke to John, my agent, forgetting that he also has the emotional maturity of a 15-year-old, with a lovely cover letter that literally said, dear John, attached, please find the pitch for this. I believe you'll agree that it conforms in style and substance to the standards of a professional fiction pitch. If there's any tweaks, let me know. And he just reads it and goes, yeah, I sent it to them. And I was like, oh, well, now we're going to be in trouble.
Okay.
And, yeah. And 3 days later, we got literally a 1-sentence reply from the publisher. It said, you had me at vampire kangaroo.
Wow. Okay.
So for anyone out there who thinks that fantasy world, certainly in the context of UK publishing, is overly woke or overly focused on cancel culture, or whatever those kind of buzzwords are that gives people an excuse to want to be rude and mean to other human beings, I'm not saying it's not true for someone else. It's certainly not. That hasn't been the case for me. I've been shocked when I sent the manuscript for Malevolent Eight, and I was like, there's way too many despicable scenes in this book, and I hope Anne Perry won't mind this, my publisher. I said, there's a really disgusting scene, and all these like it's like overly kind of almost sexual here, and she said, oh dearie, you need to read some romantasy, then you'll see some really gross explicit stuff.
Yeah, I hear I something barbarians. I can't remember what it's called. That's horrendous, and I think that would probably break my mind if I tried to read it.
I tell you, it's I mean, it's kind of, I don't know. For me, it's been reassuring. It's been bizarre that these books that I very intentionally, because you started out by asking, how do you write a book like Malevolent Seven in a month, and part of it, I mean, obviously you have to write constantly during every day. And so you have to be in a position where you can do that. I've been a full-time novelist for the past decade, so I have the privilege of being able to devote an entire day to that. I also don't have kids. So I don't have some of those kind of absolutely necessary constraints. But mostly it goes, you have to find a kind of an emotional core, like a drive inside yourself, and just pour that out on the page like a fire hose. And that's how you do it. In a sense, it's easier for me to write, if it's a 100,000 word novel, let's say, it's easier for me to write it in a month than it would be to write it in a year. Because over the course of a year, it's very hard to constantly hang on to the same feeling.
Yeah.
But for a month, I love it. I tend to write in 4 acts. So then it's like 4 weeks. So Monday morning is the beginning of an act. And I know that by Wednesday, if I'm not in the heart of the conflict, I better hurry up. And I know that if by Friday I'm not reaching the climax of that act, I better, I got to move forward. And so from a pacing standpoint, it's almost like you're trying to write fast enough to keep up with the story.
Right.
So yeah, I love it. And but I will confess, Malevolent Eight, I think I took 6 weeks. I was feeling lazy.
Well, that's just lazy. It's just 2 weeks too long, clearly,
So I went from that to Our Lady of Blades, which I've spent 7 years on. And I just absolutely know that when Our Lady Blades come out, and it'll be sort of like, I swear it's going to be like the masterpiece of, as far as of things I've written. And I know people are going to go, there's probably going to be, I can read the reviews now going, Our Lady Blades is a fun swashbuckling romp that doesn't take itself too seriously.
Not as good as Crucible of Chaos.
or Malevolent Eight, where clearly that's where he was really delving into his themes. But on the other hand, I absolutely adore the cover for Malevolent Eight.
It looks great. It looks so good.
Yeah, and Perry sort of picked the kind of the color scheme for it, and I was so grateful to her because it just turned out so lovely. Like usually, because I used to head up a design program at Vancouver Film School years ago. There's often something about a cover that will kind of get, but this one, when I opened it from the box, I was like, this thing is just absolutely gorgeous and stylistically really interesting. So, yeah.
It is difficult, going back a bit to what you were saying about trying to separate everything that's going on, not just in the world in terms of politics, but all the stuff in the industry, and kind of ignore it and not dwell on it and just block it out in some ways, to be able to write the story that you want to write, to not have those voices going, oh, maybe you shouldn't write that because you might offend someone, or someone might be upset. You're not willingly trying to do it, but there's a chance. Mm-hmm. So you've got to try and kind of shut those voices out. So I'm glad you're able to do that and write 7, and it's actually proved to be very popular, which is really good news.
Yeah, I think that I think it helps. I don't know, there's not a lot of novelists who will say, yeah, I'm gonna go write a book that's not going to be published. I'm just going to write it for me. But I do it sometimes because I feel like I have to. Like I almost have to get whatever it is that's kind of driving me out onto the page, and if for no other reason than to expunge it and to enjoy it and to remind myself that actually it's okay if I write something that I'm the only one that likes. It turns out that the more you do that, the more likely, strangely, you are to succeed with your book. And one of the reasons why, look, in fiction, you're never supposed to tell the story of how a successful novel was written in a month, because you're supposed to go, well, here's 400 bottles of whiskey. That's what it took for me to get through this book, as I sweat,
7 years and all that whiskey and it's torture and sleepless nights. And
yeah, I gave myself, multiple ulcers. But the problem I have with that, with not just actually saying, sometimes writing can just be fun. Sometimes it can just be as easy as you want it to be, is that I see so many people, younger sort of writers, people who want to write, who that when they're hit with those voices, at least you and I have the advantage that we've had books published. We know the internals of the publishing industry. Yeah. We know that nothing is as devastatingly impossible as it sometimes appears. But I meet younger writers who they might just adore Twilight, right? Yep. They might just go, I love the sparkly vampires. I love the romance between the equivalent of whatever, a 200-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl. I love but then they see how other people react to some of those elements in the media. And the people who go, oh my God, this is disgusting. It's gross. And vampires shouldn't be sexy and sparkly. It's so stupid. And then these writers start to feel like, oh, I guess I should pull it back. I guess I should, all right, I won't make them too sparkly. I won't make the romance too intense. And as soon as you do that, you write a book that literally no one will want to read, right? Because it's not trying anything. And you have to do the opposite, right? You have to go, I'm going to write the most sparkly vampires. I'm going to write the most, like everybody's so handsome and they're just getting it on. And just the universe is saved by by their love and their, you know, all these kind of things. You have to kind of go that far out, because otherwise you're not really giving the reader anything in particular to kind of respond to. And yeah, so I just think it's important for people for writers to feel like, okay, I'm allowed to write. I'm allowed to write what I want.
Yeah.
The world is not actually out to get me. The woke mob is not out to get me. The whatever goddamn incels or whoever they are, you know, the right, you know, are probably not out to get me either. You know, there's a lot of people that groups target, and it can start to feel like, well, you're guaranteed to be one of the people they target, but for the most part, you know, they don't. And usually the people that they target, it has nothing to do with what they've actually written or said.
Yeah.
So, you know,
writing should be fun. There should be a sense of joy in it. You should enjoy the process. I think it can be challenging and it can be tough sometimes. In my experience, some days I just don't want to do it, but I also, you know, then the next day I come back and I enjoy it again. So it's you know, it's ups and downs, but 9 times out of 10 I like sitting down and writing. I mean, if I didn't, I'd go and do something else. Like some people saying, oh, I've got a book in me, but it's really difficult, really challenging, and I didn't get further than 20,000 words and it's so hard. I'm like, if you're not enjoying it, go and do something else. Go and be a sculptor. Go and, like, you know, if it's not fun for you, don't do it. Like, no one's pushing you over a volcano saying you have to write a book.
No, you're absolutely right. But I would say this, because I'm the guy that almost never wants to sit down to write, and often complains about it all the time. But yeah, was it Dorothy L. Sayre who said, I hate writing, I love having written? I love having written at a level where it almost doesn't matter how hard the actual writing is. You know, and it just, I just don't, I've done so many different careers in my life. I've had all these amazing jobs and opportunities. I've never found anything that was so rewarding that when you know, as being a novelist, that when you finish your novel, whether you have a traditional publisher or you self-publish it, as long as you just try to write with integrity in terms of your creative process, you know, at the end of it, it's just this miraculous thing that can never be taken away from you. I remember when I put the fourth Greatcoats book on the mantle. So this is, you know, when the fourth book came out, I put it on the mantle and I stood back. I literally just said, I win. Like, that's it. No one, it doesn't matter whatever happens after this. No one will ever be able to take that away. And so for me, it's an endless source of just satisfaction in the process of working. So yeah, for people out there, you know, the good news is, one of the great things about writing is there's no particular age where you have to start. I started vastly later than most people. And the great Dave Duncan, who wrote, I don't know, 50 novels or something, I think his first book came out when he was 50 years old.
Right.
He was a chemical engineer. So for people who are like, I know I have a novel in me, but I don't feel like it, you know, it's okay. You don't have to. It'll come out when it's ready to come out.
Yeah, I debuted fairly late as well, so you know.
Wait, you look like you're 22.
I debuted at 38.
Really?
So that was 10 years ago. Yeah. So
crap. I gotta improve my skincare regimen.
A bit more moisturizer. Yeah, it's that thing of finding the right time and finding the right book, and yeah, finding something that's fun, that you enjoy, and pushing boundaries too. And also I was going to say, because in the Malevolent 7 and 8, all of the magic users are called wonderists, which I thought was quite nice. That there's this sense of, there's lots of different magic systems. There isn't one tied down, and they're all, what do they call it? Soft magic system. You don't explain everything. You don't put it down to the nth detail. And I like that. I don't want you to tell me that A plus B plus C equals every time. It robs me of that joy and that mystery. So I like the fact that all of the magic users are called wonderists as a collective. That was really made me chuckle to myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to figure out what's natural in that world. So the problem I sometimes have with the kind of what people sometimes call hard magic system, where everything's explained. And actually, I have to write. I've signed up to write a trilogy for some wonderful publisher out of the States called Athon Books. That's going to be progression fantasy, which is very specifically, you know, You
Yeah,
have to know how the
it's
progression.
computer game type evolvement of characters, sort of thing,
Yeah, and
leveling up.
so and so I kind of like so for me it's an interesting challenge because I have to make a world and a system where it makes sense that people would talk about those things, right?
Yeah,
The problem with hard magic systems is a notion in some approaches is that to me it always makes me think of two people sitting at a bar. One gets a call on their cell phone and answers it and then goes, yeah, I got a call over my cell phone, which uses a series of chips and satellites over which to, transmit things. And there's these different bands. And if you're too far from the cell tower, it won't work. And of course, there's roaming charges. There's a real cost to this magic of this phone. So people don't do that, right? Magic. So you have to recognize whether magic is a very esoteric thing in that world, a very common thing. And most magic would probably be things that most people wouldn't have a good sense of. I mean, the average person can't tell you what any given plumbing supply is, right? Like they wouldn't,
Yep.
And so when we write things, you have to, the context has to make sense for it. But yeah, one of my favorite things to do, I'm a little bit obsessive about this, is I like, because I studied cultural history in university, I like the reasons why things have certain names or the reason why people treat, different aspects of a culture in different ways. So I like the notion of, calling them wonderists, that's the word for people who have an attunement to these different magical realms and therefore are able to channel the different laws of physics of those realms. So that's basically what a spell is in the context of the world of Malevolent 7 and Malevolent 8. It's a breach between the mortal realm and some other realm where the laws of physics are different. And those laws kind of leak through momentarily. Yep. And therefore you can make all of these strange things happen depending on what realm you're attuned to. And so, yeah, I really liked doing that. But equally important to me than having sort of a justification for how a magic system works or even what the different forms are. And it's funny because Malevolent 7 ended up being one of the few books where I intentionally later on did kind of come up with all the names of each of the different esoteric systems. And actually in Malevolent 8 in the book, there's a little Mattis person there that shows you all the different, what each of the different magic systems are that are used in this particular book. But equally important to me was the most realistic thing about the magic system in Malevolent 7 is that there's a type of magic called luminism. So people who are attuned to the luxoral realm. And so they can like conjure light and illusions and things like that. And it's that everybody hates luminists. Like if you're in the business, luminists are the people you don't hang out with because they're just like the people that make, porn, if you're in the movie business, like you recognize that there's a function to it. And you recognize that sometimes maybe it can be good, but you don't really want to hang out with them at the good restaurants where people might see you.
They're even lower than rat mages in some ways. That's what's so surprising, that people could tolerate the rat mage, but leave that Lumis like, oh god, those guys are just awful.
Yeah, because every industry I've ever been in, there's always somebody who gets kind of denigrated. Like, I've been a musician most of my life. It's always like bass players, do something anybody could do, which is of course not true. And everybody hates saxophone players because really, what are they doing on stage? If they're not soloing, they're just annoying you. And so so that for me, that's what makes something feel real to me is when there's a kind of a cultural landscape underneath it. That's one of the things that's so much fun about the Malevolent 7 series for me is that those characters, because they're all wondrous, like they get to kind of expose all of those different kind of cultural biases and things of we hate luminists or Cade always complains about Aridaeus, who's a rat mage, because I wanted it to be that rat mages actually tend to be like incredibly noble and dashing and well groomed and they're handsome and they're just always like the nicest and Aridaeus will always tell you like, well, no, because I'm attuned to the totemic, a particular part of the totemic realm that's associated with rats, and as we all know, rats are the noblest, the kindest, the most and so I just that's the stuff that makes it fun for me. So yeah, and so that's what I love about writing those books. And to answer your question earlier, yes, there's a Malevolent 9, which I start writing in a couple of months.
Excellent. I really love the Rat Mage. I really loved Cade, and I loved Corrigan, who's just this loud, brash Thunder Mage who's just really. I would only say he has some good intentions, but also a lot of bad decision making, and he's just kind of do first, impulse control, does something, and thinks about it later.
Well, again, I wanted it to be that the different forms of magic that people are attuned to actually affected them in the way that they would if those things were real. And Corrigan's a guy, he's a tempestoral mage. They sometimes call them thunderers. He's the guy that can just like summon a massive bolt of destructive energy that blows something up. And so for him, that is usually a far simpler solution to a problem than having to negotiate.
Just blow it up.
Yeah, I love Corrigan because he makes a perfect not so much foil for Cade, but I was listening. One of my favorite things about being an author, I don't know if you find this, but getting to hear the audiobook of your own work. Because Joe Jameson is such a fabulous narrator. He voices all the characters. He acts those pieces of the story out. And so I love listening to it. And I was listening to Malevolent 8 because I'm gearing up to write Malevolent 9. And one of the things I like about Corrigan, that you forget things that you put in the book. So Corrigan is incredibly offensive most of the time. He's constantly talking about his genitalia and how impressive it is. And he's constantly talking about, hookers and wanting to have sex with. But what Cade loves about him, what I love about him, is that he's also the guy that he doesn't go for the sort of young, overly young, sort of somewhat perfect, looking prostitutes and things. He likes what he thinks of as proper women who have proper curves and are proper big, and and you can really have fun together. It's those kind of weird levels of nuance. Like on the one hand, he's kind of despicable because he's constantly talking about wanting to have sex with people, but on the other hand, he's kind of redeemed by the fact that he actually wants to have sex with people, not with supermodels or whatever the equivalent would be in that world. So and that's what I mean about you can actually write pretty irreverent stuff today, even inside of mainstream fantasy novels, and as long as you just try to make sure that you're not targeting anybody, that you're not hurt, and that you're not accidentally hurting people, and that, sometimes you can't help it, that will sometimes happen and you have to own it, but you don't have to try to be completely restrained and self-censoring all the time. You can say things, and I think most people take it with good grace.
I think so. Yeah. There's certainly room for pushing the envelope and seeing what happens on a new project. So before you go, last thing I wanted to ask was, is there any news on the adaptations of any of your various projects that have been optioned? Is there anything you can tell us?
Oh, thank you for ending the interview with the most depressing question possible. Thank you.
All right, let's move on.
No. Look, here's the thing. I tell people this all the time. If I wanted to be in Hollywood, I could have written screenplays. Like, writing novels was not easy for me. I don't think writing screenplays would have been that much harder. Now, maybe I'd suck at screenplays. But I wrote novels because I love being a novelist, because novels were what was incredibly important to me when I was young and continue to be into my dotage. So I love the people that I get to meet in that world.
Yeah.
The first time I met Chad Stahelski, who's the director of John Wick. So he's the director who's attached to Spellslinger. I loved meeting, because he's such a smart guy. And, literally the first thing he said to me was, in the last 4 months, I've read every single thing you've written twice. And
wow.
He'd found my short story collection and read that. And he understood everything I was doing at a level that most people would never bother to. He's so interesting in his creative process. People always think like he's the guy for just amazing action scenes and all of this kind of, stuff. But when you actually look at how he stages those, there's always these different Greek myths that are embedded in them. And these really, I think he's brilliant. So I love those experiences. I had dinner with Alex Koskis, who's one of the producers attached to Spellslinger. And we get to talk about, Hallmark Christmas Prince movies, which is the one thing that I desperately want to write a screenplay for. I have never wanted to write screenplays. I've only done it, when somebody asked me to as a favor. But I really want to write a Hallmark Christmas Prince movie because I love watching them. I don't know why, but so all those things are super fun, right? And on top of it, they give you money every 18 months as your option rolls over, and so it's all wonderful. If, however, what I was looking at day to day was, okay, is this going to get made? When's it going to come out? It's going to get made. Who's going to be cast? I would drive myself nuts. And so I keep a very safe distance from it. I try not to hassle the producers. People write to me going, could you please cast me in Spellslinger?
Yeah.
I always have to say, like, I will literally be the last person after the dolly grip who gets asked who should be cast in it. And that's how it should be, because they need to make their thing. So what I know that I can say is I know that Spellslinger, for example, is being shopped. Greatcoats is being shopped. They were both optioned. We're keen for someone actually to buy to option the Malevolent 7 books, because I just think, who doesn't want to watch mages on the big screen blowing things up and swearing constantly? Also, Vampire Kangaroo. I really think,
come on.
It
sells itself.
Yeah, that's like Vampire Kangaroo is the Will Smith of Hannibal. Like it's box office. But yeah, I never worry about it. So I know it's being shopped. I know gotten to see some of the pitches. I've gotten to talk to or interact with some of the writers who've been involved at different stages. And it's always wonderful. I always enjoy it. Even when it's crazy, I enjoy it. Even when you like reading a treatment where someone has literally taken one of your stories and done to it the thing you most never wanted to do to it. I still find it incredibly entertaining and enjoyable. So I don't know whether it'll happen. Basically, but to give you some context, I always think this is a good reality check. So the reason why everybody found out about Spellslinger being adapted was that I guess Variety magazine found out that Chad Stahelski was attached. They contacted the producers and said, look, we're going to write about this one way or another. So do you want to participate in the interview or not? And so then they said, okay, well, we'll do a press release. And then all of a sudden it's in Variety, it's on MSN, it's like all these different places. It sort of comes about. Everybody who I haven't spoken to in 10 years is, messaging me on whatever social media platform I regrettably am on, and saying like, hey, this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. So Amazon, even when you're not publishing yourself through Amazon, lets you see in North America your not your actual book sales, but like a kind of a metric that's roughly the book sales of a book. And so I thought, well, this is fun. I'll look at how many copies Spellslinger sold the 2 weeks before the announcement and how many the 2 weeks after. The numbers were identical.
Oh.
No one on the planet goes, oh my God, there's going to be a fantasy movie about this like teenager learning this magic system and these people called the Argosi, or these sort of wandering, gambler philosophers, and there's a talking squirrel cat. There's going to be a TV show of that. I'll run out and read the book. No, they're like, cool, I'll wait until that happens. So James Ellroy, I think, was it James Ellroy? Yeah, James Ellroy, who did LA Confidential. Yes, tells a story that I adore, where he went into a video store back when there were video stores, and somebody was renting LA Confidential, and the clerk said, that's the author. And they said, oh my God, we love you so much. We've watched this movie like 10 times. And he said, did you buy the book? And they said, no. And then he says, in typical James Ellroy fashion, something that is not repeatable. And so that's the nature. I meet so many writers who will say, oh my God, like you've been optioned. Like I wish, that's my dream. And I'm like, you're living the dream that everybody in Hollywood has. Like, they all think, you know what I'd really like to do? Write a novel and be a novelist, because it's the best job in the universe.
It's a common story that I met Joe Abercrombie last week at an event, and he's the same thing. He's like, we had a thing in Variety with Jessica Ferguson attached and all this sort of stuff, and then nothing. And then he spent years, he took a couple of years off writing to do stuff in Hollywood. It's going to happen. Nothing. So he's like, believe it when it appears. Until then, no clue what is going to happen, if it'll happen.
I tell you, I think it'll probably, I think it probably will happen, just because the people involved are there's some really great people. But it has to become their thing to some extent. Like the more And so for me, and that's a positive. So first of all, because when at the point at which I get to turn on my TV and watch the first episode of Spellslinger, I'll be getting to watch something new, not just a reflection of exactly what I wrote.
Yeah.
And second of all, when they, I don't know, turn Farius into a hot 17-year-old instead of the 40-year-old woman that I wrote her as, I'll be able to say that wasn't me. Or whatever they choose to do. I mean, these are all, they're all good writers. They're all good people. So they know what they're doing. And yeah, but that's the thing. Like as a writer, you just have to kind of have fun with it. Right. Lots of people, Andrew Child went through this when the first Jack Reacher movie came out, and it's, Tom Cruise, and people were like, that's not Jack Reacher. That's not, and he's ruined the books. And Andrew Child would say, go back, go to your shelf, find the book. You'll see Jack Reacher is exactly still there. He's still 6'5" or whatever the hell he is.
Yeah.
And I loved the Tom Cruise, the first Jack Reacher movie. I was like, that feels like that personality to me. I don't care whether he's 6'5" or not. So yeah, that the worst thing you can do, I think, as a writer is to get too obsessed about Hollywood, because even if your dream comes true, they are going to do what they're going to make the best artistic product that they can make with what they think will be right. And you get consulted, and that's lovely.
That's fine.
But at the end of the day, it's got to be somebody else's art. So,
yeah, it's their project. Quick question from Bumpy said he wished he could get a reprint of Spellslinger's Argosy hardcover set.
Oh yeah, me too. So
that would be cool.
Well, so here's a funny, very short story before I go off to write an actual book. So when the third Spellslinger book came out in hardback, it was called Charmcaster, and the publishers, I think, only printed 1,500 copies, and they said, well, because as the books go on, less and less people will buy the books. You'll never get more people buying book 3 than who bought book 1. Now, that's true overall, but not true at the beginning, because at the beginning it actually goes up because more people are waiting to buy the book.
Yep.
And so your third book in its first week should sell more copies than the first book in the series in its first week, right? But they decided, well, let's not overprint. So they printed 1,500 copies. And I remember saying, like, I just don't think this is enough. And then they sold out right away. And then for a couple of years, I was seeing things like people would constantly, there's literally an FAQ on my website just to explain why you can't find the Charmcaster hardback. And I was seeing on Amazon, like, people selling copies for $5,000 US, $10,000 US. And I was like, seriously, that's insane. I was calling my friends that I had given signed copies to, and I was saying, for God's sakes, go put this book on eBay. I would do it if it wasn't so horribly inappropriate. and they'd be like, no, this was and I was like, no, just trust me. Like, make your money while you can, because either they'll end up reprinting them, and it won't; those copies won't be worth a ton, or people just get tired of it, and then they'll move on, right?
Yeah.
And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So now I think you can sometimes find a copy for 150 or 200 or 300.
Okay, there you go.
So, however, I don't know so I won't say who, because that would maybe get me in some trouble. I do believe there is going to be special editions of the Spellslinger and Argosy books in hardback coming out, I think, next year.
Okay, there you go.
I won't say who.
No,
but you
yeah,
could try to guess.
Yeah, and there's a few companies that do them, so you can watch out for it next year.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah. So for God's sakes, don't pay $10,000 for hardback of Charmcaster.
No, I hate it when the prices get really silly, because if they're that popular, someone will usually kind of do a reprint or something will happen. You would think, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we'll wrap it up there for tonight. Obviously, as we mentioned, if you weren't here at the beginning, Sebastien is coming to the UK. He will be appearing at Chimera in Edinburgh. Then he will be down here in Birmingham in early June. And if you want to see him at one of those events, tickets are available for the Broken Binding from their website, so you can check him out and meet him in person, get a bunch of books signed. But thank you for joining us for tonight, and thank you for everybody for tuning in who have watched this back later. And all right, we'll say good night for now. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Stephen.
Cheers.